Thanks everybody for joining today. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about something new, and we're going to talk about why it's actually new and what has changed during the last 6 months to make this a really viable option. So let's talk about PERM. PERM is the labor certification process associated with workers where employers are intended on getting them what we refer to as immigrant visas. So the distinction between an immigrant and a non-immigrant is their intent to remain in the United States permanently. Non-immigrants are authorized to enter the United States for a certain period of time and are allowed to work, they're allowed to egress, they're allowed to ingress, but for all intents and purposes, they can't have any sort of intent on remaining in the United States, which what that means from a government perspective is, do they intend on purchasing real estate? Are they putting their children in schools? Are they buying assets? That kind of stuff. All of that is indicia of an intent to immigrate, remain in the United States, potentially illegally. And so that's why intent is critical for non-immigrants entering the United States. H-2B workers, TN workers, H-1B workers, and the like are all non-immigrants. They're individuals who are going to enter the United States temporarily and then leave. Permanent in intent to remain in the United States is what we refer to as an immigrant. It's an individual who's not interested in returning to their country of origin or is interested in setting up residency in the United States for the rest of their life. What that means is that essentially that individual, once they receive a immigrant visa, is allowed to get a lawful permanent resident card, which is commonly referred to as a green card, even though it's white, and remain in the United States for as long as they want, can work for whichever employer that they want, and can leave and enter the United States as they want. So in most instances, before a United States employer can submit an immigrant petition for any one worker, the employer needs to apply for a certified labor certification from the Department of Labor. And so that the purpose of this webinar is to explain the nuances of obtaining green cards for your workers, but in giving you a little bit of a nuance that didn't exist earlier, which protects you from the risk associated with the process. United States Department of Labor will then certify that there are no United States workers that are able, willing, and qualified and available to accept the job opportunity for you, and that in employment of the individual for whom you're petitioning is not going to disrupt the American labor market. It's not going to change the conditions of work. It's not going to change wages. And for those of you who have been my clients for the last 20 years, you know that this sounds remarkably familiar because yes, it's almost exactly like the H-2B process. In the H-2B process, we seek a prevailing wage. We submit a labor certification. We identify our need. In the H-2B space, you have to identify that it's temporary. You go through recruitment, and then the workforce agency in your jurisdiction is going to identify that no employees applied for the opportunity. It's very similar in the PERM context. In the PERM context, you're basically saying that you've got a long-term opportunity, that there are no employees that are applying for the position that you have available, and that you have a foreign national who's interested, who maintains that skill set, who's interested in remaining in the United States and working for you for a long period of time. So how does it work? There are 4 steps to a PERM application. The first step is to identify that you have an opportunity that is available to a foreign national. That's easy. That's everybody. Every employer has an opportunity for the most part that could be met with the job qualifications and the experience of a foreign national. Number 2, you have to request and receive a prevailing wage determination from the National Prevailing Wage Center. In the H-2B space, that's 30 days. We submit an application for a prevailing wage, and the determination comes in 30 days. In the next step of the perm process is to complete the recruitment and then the notice of filing. So you basically have to advertise for a longer period of time than you do in the H-2B space. And you have to use two different sources of advertisement. You can't rely upon the workforce agency to conduct your recruitment for you. You've got to be a little bit more broad as you approach your recruitment process. And then finally, you submit a 9089, which is an application very, very much like the 9142 that we submit for you in the H-2B space, which identifies who you are, where you are, what the opportunity is, the area of that opportunity, that you've identified somebody who has a skill set that can assist you with that opportunity, that you've attempted to recruit for that opportunity, and that upon the conclusion of recruitment, you couldn't find any available willing and able United States workers for that opportunity. Okay, so what's the catch? There are three pretty significant catches. The first one is it takes a long time. Currently, prevailing wage determinations are taking 278 days. Now, the reason why that's important is because the calendar year is only 265 days, which means that the timing of the prevailing wage determination request is pretty important. And that's because prevailing wages expire. They have an expiration date on them. So you have to make sure that you get the timing right to ensure that your prevailing wage is something that you can utilize during the recruitment period, that during the 30-day recruitment period, your prevailing wage doesn't expire before you submit the 9189. The Department of Labor must publish the processing times on their website. It's a requirement by Congress. And so if you are ever interested in looking at the processing times, it's on the United States Department of Labor website. Second thing, it's really expensive. As most of you know, I'm always trying to reduce the marginal cost associated with the H-2B process for you. In an ideal world, the cost of each worker per year is going to be about $50, which is unbelievable. Most of you spend significantly more on your onboarding and your recruitment process than the $50 that we try and charge for your H-2B workers for the 10 months that they're in the United States. In the perm, it's pretty expensive, and that's because not only is the application very difficult and that we need to put a lot of research, legal support, and then evidentiary support into the perm application, but you also have to conduct this advertisement that's not freely available to you as it is in the H-2B space. For most of you, you're going to have to, recruit in a newspaper of wide circulation in your area, even though the fact is most of us don't receive or read the newspaper, with the exception of probably the Sunday New York Times. And that can run, depending on your metropolitan area, upwards of $3,000. The most expensive advertisements for job opportunities are obviously in your major cities, including Houston. So that cost associated with the advertising will change depending on what kind of market you're in. If you're in Central Texas, North Texas, the Pacific Northwest, Southwest United States, and Southeast United States, the advertising cost is significantly lower than it is obviously in the Midwest and the Northeast. The all-in cost associated for a perm is about $13,000, and that is a per man. So if you're one of my big clients who utilize, 400, 500 H-2Bs, then this might not make a lot of sense to you just because of the expense associated with the process. But if you are an H-2B dependent employer, meaning you're a small employer and you only employ 16 or 20 H-2Bs, but if you lose those H-2Bs, you're going to go bankrupt, then it may be worth the cost associated with the process to ensure that you don't have the instability associated with the current H-2B program. Well, what is the worst part of it all? The worst part of it all is you have now invested significant amount of money and time into seeking an immigrant visa for one of your workers. As soon as you hand them that visa, they are no longer tied to you. once they convert the immigrant visa into a lawful permanent residency, they become a free agent. They can work for anybody. And so for most of you, as we've had these discussions over the last 10, 20 years about the perm process, I will remind you that because the cost is so onerous and because the options of the employees are um, so vary, it may not make sense for you to apply for perm. Now, for those of you who have invested in perm with us, you'll know that for the most part, the employees that you sponsor stay with you forever. And that's because for most of my clients, the employees that they're petitioning for have either been with them for a very, very long period of time or their relatives. And so if you have one of those situations, then it may make more sense to invest rather than take a gamble on somebody who you've been bringing into the United States for just one H-2B season. So those are the three real kind of downsides to the perm process. It takes a long time, it's really expensive, and as soon as you invest all of that time and money into that relationship, they can break your heart. So with that in mind, let's look at a little bit of a new novel approach in handling the perm process. What's changed is that we've received advisement from not only the Department of Labor, but some jurisdictions throughout the United States that the employee's contribution into the payment of the expenses associated with the process can be made upfront, meaning that they can deposit into escrow against the filing fees and costs associated with the adjustment status, meaning that you can actually accept money at the initiation of the perm process to start that process, which means that your initial investment is significantly lower than that $4,000 that we were talking about. And that over the course of your relationship with that employee, they can continue to invest in the perm process, which means that now that they've got skin in the game, they're going to be a lot more encouraged to not only be patient with the timing associated with the process, but are likely to stay with you the rest of their employment life. That change is a new change. It used to be that we were horribly anxious about having the employee spend any sort of money associated with the perm process. And that's because, for the most part, during the Democrat administration, so going back all the way to President Clinton, President Obama, and President Biden, there had been significant guidance indicating that any sort of employee investment into the perm processing was essentially indentured servitude and violated the 13th Amendment. You were basically enslaving a foreign national into working for you because they were paying for the vast majority of perm, and the government took the position that that is encouraging slavery is always a bad thing. This administration and the previous Trump administration have now issued guidance indicating that no, it's not indentured servitude. All it is it's basically a pay to play situation where, notwithstanding the fact that they have to pay for the last part, which is the adjustment process from them elevating their immigrant visa into a green card, what we want to do is encourage an employer to go through this process knowing that the employee has some skin in the game. We don't want to make it or break it situation where the employer gets to the end of their relationship and the investment that they've made in both money and time just walks out the door. I think that is a more progressive way to approach the relationship between your employees and you. I think it is basically kind of a fresh air approach. For the last probably 20 years, lawyers have been looking into signing either non-competes or non-solicitation agreements with their employees so that the employee would disgorge some of the cost associated with the perm. This takes that kind of idea and makes it very transparent. Basically says, look, we're not going to hold an employer responsible for violating the Department of Labor regulations as it relates to slavery and indentured servitude for nationals, because both parties can equally agree to this. Essentially, if it's transparent at the front end, you sign a waiver of a conflict, you acknowledge the payment, what the payment is going to be for, the employee can not only execute that agreement, but knows that their investment is going to result in a green card. And as long as all of the parties are aware of it, nobody's getting, endangered by that. As it relates to this escrow, not only can you have a situation where the employee actually pays at the initiation of the process, but you can also deduct the cost associated with your front end investment from their paycheck. So not only is it a situation where if they had the funds to be able to proceed, you could make this available to you and they would pay you up front. You can also set up a process where you actually deduct part of the cost or the expense associated with that initiation of the perm from their paychecks. The reason why I think that is a little bit more encouraging is because it's been my experience that what a foreign national will do is want to initiate this process. And what they'll do is, in exchange for promises to use their green card to sponsor their parents, children, or spouses to enter the United States based on their own sponsorship after they naturalize, that they'll encourage the family to essentially forward those fees. And so that creates a situation where you've got a foreign national in the United States who's eventually going to get a green card who hasn't paid for anything because they've essentially borrowed the money from their parents in order to justify the sponsorship of their parents in the future. If you actually take out like a monthly deduction from them, let's say it's $50 a month or $100 a month, then that is going to encourage them to not only maintain the process, but it's going to get around a situation where they're borrowing the money from their family. So it's kind of a big deal. So the reason why this is a game changer is if you visit with your employees and identify that perm is an option for them, what we can do is we can set up a system where they essentially pay you $3,500 or promise to pay you $3,500 over the course of a calendar year, which completely pays for the professional fees associated with that first part of the perm. So the first part of the perm is the hardest part. It's the waiting for the prevailing wage, preparing the application, and then finishing recruitment. If you do those three things, right, you pay for us to strategize how we're going to justify this immigrant visa to the Department of Labor. And we supervise your recruitment with you. And we submit the application at the end of the process with the summary of the recruitment results. The likelihood of success of the perm is nearly 100%. No lawyer is going to tell you anything is 100% guaranteed, but what I can tell you is we've never not had a immigrant visa approved based on our approved labor certification, and our labor certifications have been approved for the last 20 years in every single occurrence. And so what you're essentially doing is getting the employee to front the fees associated with the process such that you're guaranteed a result. And that result is, yes, they're going to be able to remain here permanently. And then you can arrange for the payment of the professional fees associated with the immigrant visa, and then identify that they're responsible for paying for the adjustment application and essentially the green card processing. What you're essentially doing is shifting the burden. The risk associated with the process goes to the employee until you're assured a guaranteed result, which is going to be the green card. And then you can go ahead and take over the expenses associated with that risk, knowing that the risk is near zero. So it's just a burden shifting mechanism that has been approved by the Trump administration, which I think puts you in a much better position to handle the insecurity associated with the current H-2B process. Like I said, why would we do this? Well, the likelihood of success is nearly 100%. I would say it's like 99.9999 likely to succeed. And you guys have not bore any of the expenses during that process, which has the risk for failure, meaning that the employee leaves. The risk that the employee leaves is completely mitigated by the fact that they've invested in the process. They have skin in the game, and so they're going to want to see it through before they make any horrible decisions about leaving you as an employer. Green card holders can always enter and exit the United States at any time and are always work authorized, which means if you have H-2B workers right now, every year we're at risk. We don't know where you are going to be in the lottery. We don't know what they're going to do with the cap. And our timing is very rigid. Again, if you have any questions about the timing of the process, just ask your paralegal or our admins to send you a copy of the webinar from last week, which will tell you why we are so rigidly connected to October 1st and April 1st. You also never need to participate in the lottery ever again. And so for those of you who are not in Lottery A group, you're in limbo right now. There are approximately 133,000 beneficiaries who, as of today, are not going to get visas, and that is because the government has not announced the supplemental visa rule. They've alluded to it. AILA's alluded to it. SIA's alluded to it. The Department of Labor has alluded to it, but we don't have a rule. So if you're in lottery group B or through all the way to H, right now you're screwed. You're not getting your H-2B workers. We're going to come up with novel approaches for most of you to get some of your visas. But right now, there's no way that I can guarantee any of you are going to get anything. And that's because we don't have a supplemental visa rule. And, we're stuck with the Department of Labor's lottery system the way that it is. And so this perm alternative is something that you should consider. And the reason why you should consider it is because if President Trump hasn't announced the supplemental visa rule this year, he may not do so over the next 3 years. And we can get you green cards, basically within a year from start to finish, so that next year, your H-2B worker that would be here that has been capped out, or you've been capped out because of your lottery selection, will be here by the spring of 2027. So it is something to consider. And obviously, you can seek the employee to take on the risk at the front end to ensure that there's not a situation where they're leaving you during the perm process and you're out both the time and the money associated with it. I always include this slide, and it's because although I love you all, I can't keep track of what I say on the phone. So that's why email communication is always preferable. Please, if you would like to talk to me, it's better to schedule a time with any of our paralegals. If you send Emma or Penelope or Eddie or Anissa an email saying, hey, can I get on Kevin's calendar? That's a lot better than just calling my cell phone and hoping that I can answer it right then, because usually I'm actually talking to somebody else. What's ahead? Cap relief. As soon as the rule is announced, if the rule is announced, I'll go ahead and schedule another webinar and explain how the rule is going to work, whether it's limited to returning workers, whether the Northern Triangle is included, all of that. But as of right now, if you're not Lottery A group, you're screwed. And if we don't get supplemental visas, I can't do anything if you call me on the phone and say, hey, what alternatives? I'm group B, I'm group C. What alternatives can you give me to get my H-2B workers? Because I'm not going to have an alternative for you. There's going to be enough employers that 133,000 beneficiaries who were here last year are not going to be able to come in again. All right, if you do call me to complain, my first response to you is, did you call the Capitol switchboard and talk to your congressmen and your senators? I have now included in this slide the Capitol switchboard number. If you call that number and you say who you are, what your district is, or what your state is, they will put you in contact with that congressional office. They will immediately ship that call over. We have, I don't know that we have AT&T or Southwest Bell operators anymore, but the Capitol switchboard does. And so they will immediately forward you to your representative and your senator. Ask them to talk to the staff person who handles immigration issues and tell them that you really need cap relief. If that doesn't work, our friends over at the National Landscape Professionals Association, basically the lobbying group, the largest lobbying group for landscapers, have put together a link. If you click on the link, you will see an email is already generated for you. You simply have to identify who you are and where you live and hit send, and they will send your email to your congressional representation. It's as easy as that. It's basically an AI robot. You don't have to be a landscaper to use it. So click on the link. It'll send you to the website and you can send emails. Like I said, if we don't get cap relief and you are in Group B and you do not get your H-2B workers and you call me in the phone and you say, Kevin, can you help me? My first question is going to be, did you call the Capitol switchboard? Did you send an email? Because that's the only help I can provide you. I have, we are wonderful to have it, but we have too many clients to parcel out the few visas we're going to have in the lottery group A as leftovers to the rest of you. So please call, become political actors like I suggested that you do last week. I am sorry that I ran over 4 minutes, but I think you probably agree with me that this is something that was important to share. I look forward to helping you in any way I can in the future. So be on the lookout for our next webinar notice.